Good morning. My name is Henry Cisneros, and I am co-chair of a task force that the Bipartisan Policy Center has organized to focus on housing after the pandemic. I'm a board member at the Bipartisan Policy Center, and I have the privilege of being joined this morning by Pam Patno, also a board member at the BPC, who is a co-chair of this initiative. We're joined by the former mayor of San Diego, Kevin Faulconer, and the former mayor of Philadelphia, Mike Nutter, to create the foursome that oversees this task force. This is the second time that the Bipartisan Policy Center wades into the housing issues of our country. We did this about 10 years ago. In that instance, I was a co-chair, Pam was a director of the effort, and it resulted in some good ideas about prioritizing housing in the years after the housing crisis. It was clearly necessary at that time. We're at a juncture similar to that again. After the pandemic, we're looking at the end of eviction moratoria and the implications of that for families. Billions of dollars in emergency rental assistance have been deployed. Mortgage payment forbearance has been the story across our country. And we have seen the creation of a homeowners assistance fund. All of those things were emergency and important to do at the moment. But now that we're headed in the era past the pandemic, the question becomes, what should housing policy look like for our country? We have the privilege this morning of having with us Congressman Cleaver of Kansas City, who I knew when he was the mayor of Kansas City, and before that, a pastor of a major church, and Congressman Stivers of Ohio, who represents Steve Stivers, who represents the Columbus area in central Ohio. Both of them have important responsibilities as chair and member of the committee that's dealing with housing in the House of Representatives. Let me ask Pam Patno to say a few words of introduction, if you would.
Thank you, Henry. It's truly an honor to be working with you once again at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Good morning, Congressman Cleaver and Congressman Stivers. Thank you very much for taking time today to join us. I believe you're both going to play a critical role, an essential role in building a bipartisan housing agenda in Congress. So thanks again for your service. We're going to jump right into the questions because I know you both have committee hearings to attend to. As Henry noted, the pandemic has reminded us all how important a home is. I was hoping that you would each just reflect on this past year, this extraordinary year we've had, and how it's affected families in your districts and how it may have shaped your priorities in Congress. And Chairman Cleaver, if we could please start with you.
Well, thank you very kindly for doing this. This is important. And I'd love to talk about housing all day, every day. Just a little point of history. I have in my office right now where I am, there's a photograph on the wall, a very large photograph of the shack that I lived in Waxahachie, not too far from where the secretary lives. And when I say shack, I don't mean a real rundown house, I mean a shack. And so I moved out of that shack, which is actually 26 minutes from the Omni Hotel in downtown Dallas. And we moved into public housing. My father worked 3 jobs to get us out. It took almost 7 years. So I'm obsessed with housing. And I think that we are in a time when some good things can happen. HUD's been around since 1965. HUD's done a lot of good things. HUD has messed up on some things. And frankly, my hope this year is that I don't want to engage in changing the old, but rather constructing something new in a department that's been around since 1965.
Congressman, the President's jobs bill has spoken of housing as infrastructure, and more people agree that at least certain kinds of housing meet the definition of infrastructure. Do you think that we're going to see movement on housing as a result of its inclusion in this infrastructure package? Or how do you see that?
Well, yeah, I think it is going to move. I know that there are people with questions about whether or not the definition should be changed and that it should be part of infrastructure. From my background, it is inseparably a part of infrastructure. It's inextricably linked to infrastructure because we've got to deal with the whole person, and the whole person does more than walk across well-built bridges and nice sidewalks. The house, the home, helps to build our somebodyness. And my dad, once we moved out of public housing, bought his home. He just moved out of it last year, by the way. My father was so meticulous about that home and about the lawn. He tried to win the lawn of the year. You drop a cigarette butt on the street in front of his house, he's out there. We pray to God that he wouldn't come out with his gun, but you got to the man just, a metamorphosis occurred. The house was who he was, and it spoke to us, and I think it helped move us into middle classness. So yes, the infrastructure definition that includes housing, I think is quite appropriate.
Pam?
Ranking Member Stivers, if I could ask you to reflect on this past year and the impact that the pandemic has had on your constituents and how it's shaped your views on housing policy moving forward.
Sure, thanks, Pam. And it's a pleasure to be on with you. It's great to be on with Chairman Cleaver, who's a friend and somebody I enjoy working with on policy issues. Obviously, the pandemic showed us how tenuous many people are in their housing situation. And so luckily, bipartisan bills like the CARES Act, I voted for all the bipartisan bills that passed, including the CARES Act, included things that helped, including forbearance provisions. It included eviction moratoriums. It included moratoriums on foreclosure. It included extending unemployment benefits to help people stay in their home. So we actually did help a lot of people stay in their homes, but it's important to remember that the eviction moratorium and the forbearance is going to go away pretty soon, and the foreclosure moratorium as well. So we're going to end up with a situation where if people didn't use this time to get caught up and deal with the forbearance issue and make sure they got an agreement with their lender, they're going to be in trouble. And so we're going to come out of this with some people that could be in trouble. Now, we had rental assistance in some of the packages that will help hopefully get some renters caught up, and that's helpful. But we've got to make sure that coming out of this, the regulators are flexible with people, with the institutions dealing with the customers. Because if the regulators crack down on the financial institutions too quickly, then they'll crack down on the homeowners and lenders or borrowers too quickly, and we'll create a real problem. So we do need to make sure that there's regulatory flexibility coming out of this. And I think it helped highlight how many things people are doing in their homes living through the pandemic. People were teaching their kids in their homes. They were working from home. They were doing lots of other, basically doing everything from home, because a lot of us were in a lockdown for a long time. So it just reminds all of us how important home ownership is. And I want to highlight something that Chairman Cleaver talked about when he talked about moving from his original small home into public housing and then graduating out of public housing. That should be what we aspire to for every family that can do it. And we shouldn't see holding people in public housing forever. We should aspire to help have public housing be the trampoline that helps them springboard to their own home ownership. Those that can, and I know not everybody can, but I think it is important that we build capacity in the system. Something that's missing in what Chairman Cleaver talked about a little bit, and I know he has rural constituents too, but the housing crisis in rural America is just as real as in urban America. And one of the problems is, we've got housing and urban development that takes care of it in urban and suburban areas, but it's under the Department of Agriculture for rural areas. And in my rural parts of my district in central and southern Ohio, there are only 4 affordable rental homes available for every 10 renters that are looking for them. So there is a crisis in rural America too. and we need to deal with it. We need to deal with it in a thoughtful way. And the thing that I'll talk about more that Chairman Cleaver and I agree on is we've got to figure out how to close the racial gap of home ownership. Black families' home ownership is down here. White families' home ownership is up here. A Duke University study found that drives the wealth gap between Black and white families. And because homes are such an important savings element for most families in America. So Chairman Cleaver and I have been talking about that and are planning to work on that coming out of this crisis, because I do think that's an important part of housing policy. And while we may disagree on the scope and tactics and methods of the $2.3 trillion infrastructure package, I do think housing is important. I just don't think that the way they're addressing it in this package as a one size fits all that ignores programs like the rental assistance demonstration program that was, a Obama era project that's working in many communities. It's totally ignored in this, and you have to almost be the developer as a Metropolitan Housing Authority in the $2.3 trillion to qualify for the $213 billion at stake in housing. So I wish that this was done in a little more bipartisan way on the infrastructure bill, but I look forward to our conversations on it, and maybe we can get to a better place on it before we're done.
Chairman Cleaver, when we went into this, the housing issues, if someone had asked, what are the priority housing issues? It would have said housing affordability and home ownership. And as Ranking Member Stivers just mentioned, issues related to homelessness as well. What do you think are the vehicles available to you as chair, member of the party in the majority? What are the vehicles by which housing will move in this Congress?
Well, one of the reasons I'm supporting this package, and look, to be candid, there can be some adjustments made in this package that the vice president is putting forward, that the president is putting forth. But one of the reasons I'm excited about it is because of the opportunity for creativity. We can use those dollars to deal with issues that we've never dealt with, with any strength. I agree. Marshall, Missouri. I represent a little town called Marshall, Missouri. They haven't had the population is 12,000. They haven't had a new house built in Marshall, Missouri in 15 years. And there are some towns like Lexington with 5,000 people, and it's longer than that. I think if we are creative and if we are honest in how we distribute the dollars, I'm not saying honest versus, theft. I'm talking about honest in realizing what we have to do and the limitations that we have with the money. That we can do some things that are significant. We can change some things. One of the things that this pandemic, I think, should have taught us, and it certainly is true, we saw it in Europe, and that is the urban core where many of the black and brown individuals live. We have so much congestion. It's not as bad in Texas as it is like in Kansas City and on the East Coast and to some degree the North Coast. And people are living with each other in large numbers and around each other in huge numbers, and it's almost a petri dish. I mean, we created opportunities for COVID to be as powerful as it became, and so I think we can use these dollars to do things like embrace not just the Hope 6 program, which I think is being redesigned, where we not only deal with a public housing project, but the neighborhood around public housing, because we are whole people and we don't stay in one spot. And so I think we ought to understand that in the urban core, I don't think the death toll would be as high as it has been if we had a different housing pattern.
Pam?
Chairman Cleavers, Henry and I both served in different capacities at HUD. We're aware of the strengths and weaknesses, and just wanted you to comment, please, on how you can help the new leadership overcome some of the operational challenges significant headway has been made with IT modernization, but a long ways to go. So either Chairman Cleaver or Ranking Member Stivers, if you could please comment.
Well, the good news for me, and frankly, it's the good news for General Stivers, because he's from Ohio, is that Marcia Fudge, a lifelong friend of mine and my wife, is committed to change. And if you know her at all, you know that she is not one who's going to listen to the people who've been at HUD since 1926, before it was created. And this is the way we do it, and you be careful, don't use that door and that kind of thing. And how do I know? Because she's told me. We had a conversation about this last week. And so I think that the good news is, fortuitously, I have a chance to work with somebody with whom I can work, Marcia Fudge, and a Republican in the committee, the ranking member, with whom I can work. I think, and we've got some ideas about home ownership as it relates to public housing, but I think this is an opportunity for us, and I'm excited about it.
You referred to Congressman Stivers as General Stiver, and that is because he served 30 years in the Ohio Army National Guard and holds the rank of Major General. Also received the Bronze Star during his service in Operation Iraqi Freedom. So, Congressman, thank you for your service. Let me ask the same question of you with respect to these highlight kind of housing issues that existed before the pandemic and are going to be prominent again. That is affordability and homelessness and the drive to home ownership.
Yep. I think
we promised we'd get you out of here at 20 after.
No problem. I think all three of those are really important. I think I want to take a look at, if we can, in a bipartisan way, whether the housing first model might need some change on homelessness, because it's become a housing only model. And what we need is the wraparound services for homelessness to help, again, talk about building capacity to get people the help they need to have long-term viability, successful ability to move out of their circumstances, move up over time. Affordability is a huge deal, and we've got to figure out how to encourage that. I think there's ways we can work with state and local governments on affordability, and some things that we can do on affordability. And then things like the gap in the racial gap in home ownership is something that's also important. And I want to quickly address what my colleague did with housing and urban development. I think the couple of issues around housing and urban development, number one, the IT systems still aren't where they need to be. And number two, I think there's been a lack of innovation inside the organization. But the great news, just like Chairman Cleaver said, is that Marcia Fudge, who's a great friend of mine and a great friend of his, is the new secretary. She is committed to change, committed to improvement. And I think she will make sure that the Housing and Urban Development Department is as effective as its mission as it can be. And I'm looking forward to working with her. We've talked on the phone a couple times since she's been confirmed, and I'm going to be going over and chatting with her at her office here in the next couple of weeks. So I'm super excited to work with Chairman Cleaver and work with Secretary Fudge as we address these problems. And I think we can address a lot of them in a bipartisan way. Yeah. You know, housing doesn't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. Everybody needs a home and everybody needs opportunity, and we need to build capacity and self-sufficiency. And that's what HUD can do. And I'm excited about working with Chairman Cleaver and Secretary Fudge. And I'm sorry, I've got to go. I've got to go testify in front of the VA committee, but you're doing a great job, Chairman Cleaver. I'll let you finish it out.
Congressman, thank you so much for your willingness to join us in a bipartisan spirit this morning. You talk about a mutual concern for both parties and everyone in our country, the issues of housing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, you've served in Congress for a number of years. As I was telling the group earlier before you came, I remember visiting with you as mayor of Kansas City when I was Secretary of HUD. And we went to a public housing development in Kansas City that day on a tour with Kit Bond, who was then the senator from Missouri. So at this point in your career, you're chairman of the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Housing, Community Development, and Insurance, and have an overarching chair in Maxine Waters, who's completely sympathetic to these questions. This must be a special moment for you to be in the chair with a Democratic majority, a Democratic president, and the ability maybe to get something done on these questions you've championed for a long time. Can you speak to that?
Yes, you know, I get so excited, I have to calm myself down because you know I start thinking. Yesterday we were on the floor voting, and I walk over to Maxine Waters, and I'm talking to her about housing issues on the floor, and then she gets excited about something, and as you probably know, I mean, her excitement is overran my excitement right there on the floor. And so, you know, she keeps saying to me, you know, look, you are the architect and the builder of a better way for us to deal with HUD. And so I've accepted that, you know, that it's not me though, it's the committee. I think we are the architects and the builders, and we can build better, to throw in a little the term that's being used around the country right now. And so I think, you know, that when this is over, when my term is over, I think we will have something to show. And I think we're going to have something to show relatively soon, because we've jumped into this thing already, you know, working, and General Stivers is easy to work with. And he's right. One thing he said, I'll put it another way, that we've got to be aware of and excited about generational wealth. And you pass generational wealth, you maintain it through property, through housing. That's how we do it. You know, my great-great-grandfather Frank Cleaver had at one time about 175 acres in Texas. I now own 35, 80 acres. That's all left. And so if you look around, there's a lot of broke, poor Cleavers, because they the thing that we could have inherited that could have created that generational wealth was in some ways stolen, and the other was given away out of ignorance.
Pam, any closing questions for
Chairman Cleaver? This is so exciting to see you working so well with the ranking member. We so appreciate your leadership and your enthusiasm. And I hope you will look to the Bipartisan Policy Center, the Housing Advisory Council, as a resource. We're here to support you, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, I'm going to send over to you guys a proposal I just sent to Chairwoman Waters, which she embraced, and so I'm going to I'd just be interested in sending it to you and getting your feedback on it.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you so
Chairman.
much for being present. Thank you for your long career of public service and the example you've set. And you're completely right. Over the years, I've observed it both as secretary and in the years since, that much of the progress you want to make for our society, be it in education or jobs or health or family stability, depends first on answering the question, where are people going to live? Where are they going to put their children down on a pillow tonight when it gets dark and be safe and have a decent platform for them to live? So you're right at the center of the bullseye on these issues in your present role. Thank you for being there.
Thank you.
I mentioned at the outset that we have, Pam and I are co-chairs, along with Mayor Faulconer and Mayor Nutter, of a new BPC task force on housing. 4 members of that task force are going to be next on this webinar, and they will be led by a BPC fellow, Dennis Shea, a former Assistant Secretary of HUD for Policy Development and Research. Dennis is on the screen now, and Pam and I turn the floor over to Dennis.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Pam. That was really a wonderful conversation, and I want to echo Pam's remark. That was great to see this spirit of bipartisanship among Chairman Cleaver and Congressman Stivers. So, as Henry pointed out, in this next segment, we're going to hear from a wonderful group of experts and practitioners who are all members of BPC's Housing Advisory Council. So let me get right. You can see them on your screen, I think, all 5 of them, and all four of us, and 4 experts and one moderator. But let me give you the brief introductions. Eileen Fitzgerald is the head of Housing Affordability Philanthropy for the Wells Fargo Foundation, which she joined in 2019. Eileen has more than 25 years of experience in housing and community development, and she previously served as president and CEO of Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, a collaborative of nonprofits that own and operate more than 140,000 affordable rental units, rental homes across the United States. Our second panelist is Lisa Rice, the president and CEO of the National Fair Housing Alliance, where she leads the Alliance's efforts to advance fair housing principles and to preserve and broaden fair housing protections. Lisa played a major role in crafting sections of the Dodd-Frank legislation and in establishing the Office of Fair Lending within the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And you may have caught Lisa testifying this past Tuesday before the Senate Banking Committee. Our next batting third is Ismael Guerrero, who is the president and CEO of Mercy Housing, a truly amazing organization that is the nation's largest affordable housing nonprofit. Prior to joining Mercy in 2020, Ismael served as executive director of the Housing Authority of the City and County of Denver. Under his direction, DHA became a nationally recognized leader in creative, affordable housing development and neighborhood transformation. Welcome. And finally, last but not least, Seth Appleton is the president of MISMO, the standards development body for the mortgage industry. Seth previously served as the Assistant Secretary for Policy Development and Research at HUD, and as the Principal Executive Vice President of Ginnie Mae. So I want to welcome everyone to this panel discussion. I should mention before I start asking questions that the participants in this webinar may submit questions for our experts using the live chat on YouTube or Facebook, or on Twitter using hashtag BPC Live. And we will get to these questions, these audience questions, after we have a bit of a conversation with the panelists. So let me start with you, Eileen. As Secretary Cisneros noted in his opening, BPC sees a real moment of opportunity to tackle the different elements of the housing crisis, and particularly to help narrow the wide disparities, wide racial and economic disparities we see in housing. So you've been someone who's has really been a motivating force behind this council. You helped convene this council. So why are you such a strong supporter of this initiative? And what do you think can be achieved with strong bipartisan leadership and champions in Congress?
Sure. Well, thanks, Dennis. And,
Sure.
Wells Fargo is very proud to be able to support this effort and to move things forward on housing. And I think to sum it up first, and then I'll go in details, really what's not okay is to not move forward, right? And we do believe that the BPC can play a critical role in bringing people together to make a difference in housing. But I guess why bipartisan? Firmly believe that the appreciation for the importance of home is not a partisan issue. We may have differences on strategies and roles and what might be the right thing to implement. But I think even, with COVID, we see that people get the incredible importance of home. So I think that's a really great foundation. Congressman Stivers brought up housing in rural areas. And I think that's, a challenge for all housing advocates and folks working on housing that often forget about that. And, as somebody who worked on that issue for quite some time, there's huge issues in rural America. So I think as we think about housing in a bipartisan way, we have to make sure we're we're not just getting, the high cost areas, but also really thinking across the country. I think the second reason is we really believe housing is infrastructure. It is the built environment, right? We think about pipes and buildings and roads. One of our biggest infrastructure issues is the fact that we have a very aging housing stock, and we also don't have enough housing. So it's fundamental as infrastructure. I think if you don't have a place for people to live, you can't grow the economy. As we all hope that coming out of COVID, that happens, that's key. And, we know that there has to be more supply. We obviously have a lot of issues in fixing what we have, but to make that economy vibrant and growth, we have to have more places for people to live. So, that again, at its fundamental is not really bipartisan. I mean, that is a bipartisan issue, right? Again, people might differ on how to execute, but the fundamental foundation feels like it's there. I think there's also, this is a time where there is a building awareness of the, systemic and historic discrimination and what that's done for housing and how that's impacted the racial wealth gap and people's opportunities in life. So we also think that plays a fundamental. And I guess, finally, a place where maybe there isn't quite as much bipartisan, but we feel like there's an opportunity is to think about this interaction between housing and climate and, and energy efficiency. So all of those, that's where BPC excels, right? You find the common ground and then help. So that's why we're excited about this.
Well, thank you so much, Eileen, and thank you for your support. And just looking at the America's Jobs Plan, President Biden's infrastructure program, you look at the housing components. There seem to be elements on housing that have strong bipartisan support. For example, using tax credits, the low-income tax credit, to build affordable rental housing is a private-public partnership and has strong bipartisan support. There's a big pitch in the proposal for encouraging localities to have more lenient and zoning regulations so that they can promote more density, perhaps, and more affordable housing. So I agree with you completely that there's plenty of ground there, bipartisan ground, that we can convene upon. So, Lisa, we know that the pandemic elevated the importance of housing stability, quality, safety, and affordability, and policymakers did take note and respond with unprecedented levels of housing assistance. Are you confident these resources are reaching those who need them most? And in the critical months ahead, where should policymakers be focusing their efforts? That's for Lisa. I don't think we can hear you, Lisa.
My apologies. Dennis, yes, as you noted, Congress did respond right after the pandemic was declared and passed the CARES Act, which contained quite extensive housing provisions. But we do know now that we have much more data about the programs and the provisions of the CARES Act and how they were implemented, we do know that assistance provided via the CARES Act was not equitable and did not reach all consumers who really needed the help. In fact, the CARES Act has exacerbated inequality because it wasn't designed or implemented through an equity lens. For example, the CARES Act forbearance provisions only covered those with federally backed mortgages, right? And roughly that covers roughly 70% of the mortgage market. So 30% of the market was not covered by those CARES Act protections, and that 30% includes all of the leftover subprime loans. And Dennis, we know that borrowers of color disproportionately received subprime loans because that was the primary mortgage vehicle, quite frankly, that was available to those consumers for the entirety of the period before the Great Recession, right? There's never been a time before the Great Recession. There's never been a time in American history where consumers of color primarily accessed credit through the financial mainstream. And that's because, as Eileen noted, because of our history and legacy of redlining and discriminatory practices. So borrowers of color are disproportionately represented in that 30% of the market that is not covered by CARES. One of the other things that we do have to keep our eye on as well is the disproportionality that we're seeing in the Census Pulse data. Asian Americans are behind on their mortgages at twice the rate of white consumers, and Black and Latino borrowers are behind on their mortgages at 3 times the rate of white borrowers. And this is partly a function of the fact that many of these consumers are overly represented in jobs that were impacted by the COVID pandemic. It's also a function of the fact that Latino and Black homeowners have not been able to access mortgage refinancing options at the same rate as their white counterparts. So we do know that there have been disparities, and because of these disparities, the National Fair Housing Alliance and other groups worked extensively with legislators and with the Biden administration to secure a homeowners assistance fund in this latest COVID relief bill. Initially, there wasn't going to be any funds for homeowners assistance in the relief package, but groups really pounded the pavement and advocated, and we got the homeowners assistance fund in the bill. So that was a huge win. And just yesterday, Treasury released guidelines for the program, and Dennis, NAFA and the National Consumer Law Center and many other organizations have been working with Treasury to ensure that there's special targeting for the Homeowners Assistance Fund for socially and economically disadvantaged homeowners, so that we can improve efforts to get assistance to those who really need it. And finally, I would say, Dennis, in the months ahead, policymakers really need to be focused on delivering a strong infrastructure bill, as you and Eileen have just noted, and that includes housing as a major pillar, right? Housing, as you guys have said, housing is infrastructure. And we are urging Congress and the administration to ensure that the bill is equitable. Previous infrastructure bills were extremely unfair. Those previous infrastructure bills helped create residential segregation and decimated so many communities of color. And this infrastructure bill must include provisions to try and redress some of that harm that was caused.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Lisa. It's a very, very comprehensive response. You have a lot on your plate and a big agenda, but thank you. I'm going to go over to Ismail right now. And Ismail, you lead one of the country's most innovative and effective affordable housing providers, and that's, of course, Mercy Housing. How are Mercy and its peer providers working to secure and distribute new federal resources? And as you continue to provide housing and supportive services to tens of thousands, literally tens of thousands of low-income families, older adults, and people with disabilities, what more could policymakers do to help?
Good morning, Dennis, and thank you for this opportunity. It's really great to be included among this panel of distinguished guests, but more importantly, experts with really, years of experience addressing these issues. As you shared earlier, I joined Mercy Housing just recently in middle of 2020. So my whole existence has been in this virtual space with all of you and, advocating on these issues. Fortunately, Mercy Housing has been around for 40 years and not just providing affordable housing, but also resident services, resident initiatives. That's really where our work begins, is when a family moves into our units. And with that in mind, our Mercy Housing, as well as my peers in the affordable housing world, have really been focused in the last year on ensuring housing stability for our families. We're very supportive of the eviction moratorium, but at the same time, as the property owners and landowners, that means we have to manage through that challenge of reduced rental revenue, and how that impacts operations while we keep our residents safe and healthy. So our focus, our number one priority has been probably accessing the rent relief that's been approved in prior CARES Act, and we're excited to see that there was additional funding in the ARPA Act as well. We, as the eviction moratorium comes to potentially a close or it sunsets, we want to make sure that we keep our residents stably housed. And so we're spending a lot of time and effort ensuring that we're accessing the rent relief that was distributed out to the states. And as you can imagine, an organization like Mercy that operates in 20 plus states, that means 20 different rent relief initiatives. So we're doing a lot of direct support with residents, helping them navigate those processes. At the same time, we're really focused on how do we make sure that money gets effectively allocated out to landlords, particularly landlords like Mercy Housing and others that are serving lower income communities, more disadvantaged communities where families have had a disproportionate impact from the pandemic and the health crisis and the economic relief that's been made available. So that's been a big focus for us to date. However, at the same time, we think it's important that we keep our eye on the prize, which is that production of new housing is as important as the preservation of the housing that we already have and the housing stability. Even as we come out of this pandemic, the gap in affordability and rental affordability continues to grow. And so we really need to continue to focus on how do we produce the units that are needed desperately out in our communities. We're excited that toward the end of, in December, at the end of 2020, there was some reforms of the 4% low-income housing tax credits, setting the base there of 4%. That's been an important catalyst for some projects that we already had in the pipeline. We know that there is going to be expanded funding for housing choice vouchers, which is a critical kind of lifeline for many families. Really helps to establish that housing stability as their income may increase or decrease due to economic or health reasons. The additional funding for homeless assistance efforts is something we're looking forward to partnering again with our states and local governments to help to build and create more opportunities and provide more services for those who, the most vulnerable, who are experiencing homelessness or at highest risk of homelessness. And then the Treasury funding for local and state governments, we're really hoping to be able to partner with those communities where we're working and the states that we're working in to find even more creative solutions to leverage those federal dollars with tax credits and with other public-private partnerships to expand the availability of affordable housing that's out there. So those are among the things we're already doing. I think when we think about looking ahead to this year and going forward, in addition to some of the ideas that have already been shared, one area that I'm particularly looking at is to make sure that we pay close attention to how the states are distributing the CARES Act funding and the ARPA funding that's been already approved. As we heard from Lisa and others, we want to make sure that there aren't disparities, that those dollars are spent equitably in the places that have seen the most impact from this COVID-19 pandemic, and that there's equitable and racial equity in how those dollars are spent and the communities that they're going to impact.
Ismail, let me. I saw you're nodding your head when Congressman Stivers talked about the need for wraparound services in conjunction with housing. You provide a lot of supportive services for your residents. I mean, could you very briefly explain how the pandemic impacted that and whether you're getting the additional support you need?
Yes, I was definitely nodding and wanted to give him the thumbs up when he made those comments, because that really is a critical piece still. When we talk about affordable housing, as he mentioned, housing stability doesn't happen without wraparound services, and there really isn't dedicated funding for those services. We, in this last year, in responding to the pandemic, were very fortunate that we had sponsors like the Wells Foundation, like Walmart, like others who really stepped in and helped us fund new food insecurity programs, new digital inclusion programs, and others. But looking forward, we can't necessarily rely only on the philanthropic, community. We really need to have, more dedicated funding for that. So both in some of the funding that's already been in place, but I think as we look ahead, how we match or marry services to permanent supportive housing vouchers, I think is going to be a critical piece of policy that needs to be looked at, because without those wraparound services, without the case management, many of those folks that we are moving from the streets into housing may not achieve the stability, the long-term stability that we're looking for.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Before I go to Seth, let me just remind everyone that you can submit questions for our experts using the live chat on YouTube or Facebook or on Twitter using hashtag BPC Live. So Seth, many Republicans recognize and are concerned about the wide racial gaps in home ownership and family wealth. We heard that from Congressman Stivers today, but are skeptical that the federal government, with its own checkered history, has the ability to address root causes and advance solutions fairly and effectively. Where do you think the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress could find some common ground with Republicans?
Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. You didn't mention in my intro, but perhaps more relevant to this question is that I'm a former House Chief of Staff to the then Chairman of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, Blaine Luetkemeyer, when Congressman Cleaver was the ranking member. And their bipartisan partnership led to the passage of the Housing Opportunity and Modernization Act in 2016 without a dissenting vote in either the House or the Senate. So I think that it's great to see Congressman Cleaver and Congressman Stivers really start off with a collaborative relationship. Looking at homeownership is the single greatest mechanism for wealth generation for most American families. That homeownership gap is to the gap in family wealth. Just to put an excellent point on it, the Federal Reserve 2019 survey of consumer finances found that the median net worth of a homeowner is $255,000, while the median net worth of a renter is $6,300. So a 40-fold difference there, which is really indicative of the scale of the problem. I think there are a few areas on which there could be some good bipartisan collaboration. As was mentioned earlier with Secretary Cisneros and Deputy Secretary Patnode, first and foremost, we need to make sure that FHA and Ginnie Mae are modern, healthy, and accessible. As of November, 33% of FHA borrowers were minorities and 83% were first-time homebuyers. So it is perhaps the most critical source of mortgage credit available to minority borrowers. We need to continue to support FHA's technology modernization efforts to ensure that lenders can navigate FHA just as easily as the conventional market. And we also need to encourage long-term participation in the programs, which means reducing uncertainty for program participants. Lenders need to have confidence in the rules of the road, so clarity and certainty around the use of things like the False Claims Act for immaterial errors continues to be really important. Ginnie Mae plays a critical role here too, as it brings liquidity to the government lending programs through its full faith and credit guarantee. So the Ginnie modernization plan that's already underway should be supported as well. And that means also allowing for more liquidity to flow into the Ginnie mortgage servicing rights market via third-party financiers and for non-issuers to invest in them, and also to really take a hard look and deep dive at some of the unique provisions of that program, such as those allowing, requiring indefinite advances of principal and interest, which is different in the GSE market, and also making it easier for securities issuers to finance advances and MSRs in the Ginnie program. So that modernization and liquidity is really important because the average origination cost right now is $9,000. And to the extent that there are fixed costs embedded in that number, they disproportionately affect borrowers seeking smaller balance loans. I'd say the other area in which there is growing bipartisan consensus, and we've heard about it earlier today, is around mitigating regulatory barriers that are constraining the development of housing supply to meet the needs of first-time borrowers who are looking to become homeowners as well as renters. The Obama administration issued a report on this. The Trump administration issued a report on this. The Biden administration is talking about this already. Industry and advocacy groups are talking about it, as are think tanks on the left and right. And many people think that this is about this really in the context of rental housing, where it is extremely important, but it also impacts home ownership in a couple of ways too, including the fact that regulations have typically made it cost prohibitive or just prohibited to build small entry-level homes that a lot of borrowers are seeking as they want to make the jump to home ownership. Some of these can be tackled by addressing federal policies, including regulations that make it difficult and expensive to purchase manufactured housing, changes that would enhance the utilization of the low-income housing tax credit, changes that could streamline duplicative environmental review barriers, but many barriers are products of state and local policies. And as Ranking Member Stivers said, we can work collaboratively on those things, like improving and accelerating the development review and permitting processes, allowing more by right development, relaxing development requirements, and a whole host of other issues in that bucket. And I would just highlight for folks out there, check out what my colleagues at the NBA are doing, focusing on working locally and collaboratively through their convergence initiatives in both Memphis and Columbus, which is focused on minority home ownership and affordable housing. It's the type of collaboration that's going to have to take place if we're going to move the needle, and not just the collaboration that we often focus on in Washington.
Well, thank you, Seth. We just got an audience question, which goes to one of your points, is that a lot of the supply constraint is a result of regulatory policies at the local and county level. So the question that we have from the audience is, our biggest issue is inventory and supply of housing. And this is for all the panelists, this question, whoever wants to jump in. These issues are primarily state and locally determined. How best can the federal government influence these jurisdictions? Does anybody want to take that on? I see Eileen.
I guess I'd like to say I do think the federal government has a critical role in rental and affordable rental. An increase in LIHTC, significant increase in LIHTC would make a big difference, right? Yes, it's not enough if you have zoning barriers, and I think that we can talk about that, and I know the others will, but fundamentally we still need the resources to build, and there is massive more demand for LIHTC than their supply, and in most cases those properties have already been identified. They can build quickly on those. So I think that then opens up opportunities for home ownership, because you start getting people in stable housing. They're not paying 60% of their income for rent. They can save. So that, I think, is the critical role. The other one is how the GSEs think about, mortgage credit. And again, opening up and that, putting that pressure point on and then do we tie incentives? And I'm sure Lisa or somebody else would like to talk about
the carrot or the stick approach. I mean, there's three approaches: the best practices approach, the carrot approach, the stick approach. Anybody weigh in favor of one or both, any of those approaches? Lisa, do you want to step in here?
I think you have to use them all. The carrot approach will work in, quite frankly, communities that want to do more affordable housing. The carrot approach is not going to be as effective in communities that may be more opposed to affordable housing development within their borders. And so there you may have to look for the stick approach. But I do think that we can rethink the kind of carrots that we're extending to communities that may be more opposed to affordable housing development. And what I mean by that is, I think we can figure out what those communities really value and what they want, and then frame the carrots around that, so that we're adding value, right? And we're not telling people, hey, we'll give you something if you, for example, streamline your zoning and your permitting processes, but what we're offering them isn't really what they want at the end of the day.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Ismail, you want to, Seth or Ismail?
Yeah,
Oh, I would just say that I agree with Eileen on the LIHTC, expansion, and it's clearly been the source of more kind of new production than any other tool in the federal toolbox. We do see the interaction of it on the ground in high cost areas though. And, we've seen reports from GAO and others over the year that like high cost jurisdictions like those in California, it costs, 2 or 3, 4 times as much to build a unit there with LIHTC than it does in other parts of the country. So there's definitely interplay on how far those dollars stretch when you have these regulatory barriers on the ground. I agree that we need to figure out how to engage communities on their own priorities and really educate them and help build capacity too, because there are a lot of communities out there that want to develop more housing stock and don't know how to do that.
Yes,
Dennis, if I could just add that, I think the one piece that hasn't been mentioned that I believe is a game changer also potentially, and it's great to see that the Biden administration has put it on the table, which is to make housing choice vouchers universally available for families to be able to have that rental subsidy. Currently 1 in 4 who are eligible receive a voucher. When I was at the Housing Authority here in Denver, we regularly had 20 to 23,000 people sign up annually for those vouchers, of which we would have 1,000 available for them. It's just a huge need, and families who are currently spending 50 to 80% of their household income toward rent, housing costs, would see huge relief that could, really be an economic driver in those communities as that disposable income got freed up.
Thank you. Eileen, did you want to come back in on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say the other thing in addition to zoning is, permitting, because sometimes the zoning is there, but the permitting becomes I'm just about local permitting issues. So I think how the federal government pushes for best practices, like as we see more modular and offsite, construction, that's a big area that you can either expedite supply or slow it down. How does HUD think about building that capacity, particularly the smaller local governments that just don't have the staff that really understands, has the training, excuse me, has the training in that. So it goes, when you talk about zoning, we have to think about making sure that capacity is on the ground, and maybe there's a role of the federal government to help support that increased capacity.
So that's a great point. There's a lot of lack of capacity at the local level on permitting and best practices around permitting and other things. That we have another question. What can be done in areas where the cost of housing is a bigger barrier than the availability of units? Cost of housing is a bigger barrier than the availability of units. Anybody want to handle that one?
I think you see that in rural areas sometimes, right? And the challenge is the incomes are so low that you literally kind of can't, you just can't operate something for that. So I think that some of the things is how we think about, median income issues across the country. Like in some rural communities, using 100% or an 80% of median income take something so low if we're looking at home ownership that we need to think about that a little higher, because that median income might be $31,000 there, while in a high cost area it's $80,000. So I think that is one example. And then to Ismail's point, at some point you just need to subsidize.
The 2 things I would say that we're doing, Dennis, at Mercy Housing. One is we are piloting and experimenting with modular housing. We were able to build a downtown San Francisco modular affordable housing development at something like 25% below the cost, what it might have costed us at conventional build. and in a much shorter time frame. So that is something that needs continued investment and innovation in that space. Other ways is through collaboration with those local communities, local municipalities, whether like we're doing here in Denver, partnering with the city of Denver on land that the city acquired to help bring down the land costs, incentives with the building department for streamlining, as Eileen pointed correctly, the permitting process, the entitlement costs, things like water tap fees and so forth. So it takes a mix of strategies, because those high costs are coming at us from different places in the development budget.
Thank you. Lisa, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Dennis, I just wanted to add that I think the affirmatively furthering fair housing provision of the Fair Housing Act can play a critical role here. For example, there is absolutely no reason why a city like the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., should be losing affordable housing units. It just is absolutely ridiculous. It's a result of poor design, poor strategy, poor implementation, and not really thinking through new housing developments that come on stream, particularly when those new housing developments are replacing, we're eliminating and raising affordable housing developments and building new developments that are not affordable.
And not being replaced.
Exactly. Those affordable units are not being replaced. There's no reason for that. And if we increase effective enforcement and compliance with the AFFH provision, we wouldn't be seeing things like that.
Seth, do you want to come in on this at all?
Yeah, I would just say on the the question of barriers where the cost of housing is the issue versus the availability of units. That's where also you have to look at the local housing market and see, is it because you can't build that entry level housing because the fixed costs to build a unit are so prohibited because of all of the whether it's supplies, permitting, reviews, whatever it is that causing the entry level price to be too high? Or is it an area where there are units, but they're not of sufficient quality? And so that's where kind of rehabilitation and preservation are really important strategies that need to be pursued also.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience that I want to get to, and this goes to the demographic changes in the United States, where a larger percentage of the population is going to be 65 and older over the next decade. So question goes to that point. Can the housing agenda include support for renovations to existing homes or housing for aging in place? Anybody want to take that on?
Well, I'll just mention, I'm so sorry. The Urban Institute did a recent report that we provide some support for on their headship on homeownership. And really the focus of the report is on homeownership. But one of the things it finds is that, in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, a smaller percentage of seniors will be homeowners. So that changes everything on its, of like, where are they going to age in place? So we have that issue that there, again, back to the supply, there are not good places and not good opportunities for them. And then I think as we think about even thinking about climate and renovations and infrastructure change, often we can make changes to something, with not a ton of money, but it's all those wrong pocket problems. I mean, the BPC is an expert on health and housing, right?
Right.
We could go time and time again how we know how to house seniors and keep them healthy, but the money is over on the health side. So
Right.
I'd say go look at a BCP report. There's so many good ideas in there.
Then when you talk to the health people, they're like, don't come over here. Don't take my pot of money. Anybody else want to talk about aging in place as part of a housing agenda?
The one thing
Dennis, I would
Go Ismail and then Seth.
Okay, I'll be brief, but I think that phenomena of seniors wanting to age in their home is it's obviously valid, and part of that is they want to be in their community, and part of it is that there isn't an affordable option for them in terms of senior living or affordable assisted living. So I think we have to look at both. How do we bring more affordable senior housing into communities where seniors live that may not have affordable options? And then when we talk about aging in place, we have this continued challenge that outside of institutional care, it's hard to finance the kind of home health care, home-based care that's needed. So in order to assist seniors in just independent living, have the additional assistance with ADLs that they need to be able to stay there healthy and safe. And so I think some, looking at reforms to Medicaid and how that kind of assisted living, nursing care type care is financed, and making it more accessible in independent living situations through home-based care is a big part of the policy agenda.
Thank you. Seth?
Yeah, I would just, a couple of things. When I was at HUD, we had a partnership with our counterparts in Japan, which has the kind of, most rapidly aging society in the developed world. And we focused a lot of research around not only kind of home modification, but also supportive services to help seniors age in place. So I think that there is a lot of interest, and it could be a good bipartisan area of collaboration. The other part of it too is we do have the home equity conversion mortgage, the reverse mortgage program. The finances of that program have been challenging from time to time, but it has been an important source of financing for seniors who want to remain in their homes and pay for some of the either modifications or home health services that they need. And so it's important to make sure that program is kind of strong and stable for the future.
Thank you. We just have a few minutes left, and I will toss out this question for everyone, and whoever wants to answer can answer. But the dreadful experience with COVID over the past year has definitely changed the way most of us live and work. Do you think these changes will be lasting? And if so, what adjustments to national housing policy will be necessary to reflect this new reality? Does anybody want to take a stab at that question?
Sure, I can start. Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Lisa. You can go ahead.
Lisa, you're up.
No, I'll just start the conversation. Yeah, I do think that COVID has fundamentally changed things. I don't know if we have exact numbers about this, but just on an anecdotal basis, as I talk to colleagues at different companies, I hear a really common refrain, and that is a surprise in the level of efficiency and productivity that they saw with their teams in a virtual environment. And I've heard more than one executive say, I'm gonna downsize my space. I'm not going to be renting as much commercial space as I have been, and I'm gonna readjust those budgetary dollars to some other place. So I do think that we're seeing whole divisions that will permanently be moved to telework. And one of the things that we've been thinking about at the National Fair Housing Alliance is, are there ways to open up some of this commercial space to other uses like affordable housing? And if that is the case, then I think our policies are going to have to incentivize developers and municipalities to help spur that transition, right? Because it's not a totally easy thing to do, can be done. And that has got to carry with it, I think, some really strong provisions to ensure that we are creating affordable units, particularly whenever federal dollars are involved in the process.
Thank you. Ismail, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, the piece that I was going to add that is, I think, going to be with us, and needs to be addressed, and it is already being addressed to some degree, is the digital equity divide, right? And we've seen coming out of this pandemic how critical it is for seniors, for families, for people with disabilities to have the availability of broadband and access to the internet in their home. And it's still not where it needs to be. It's great to see the funding that's been made available, but from conversations and discussions that I've been in, it's also clear that there's not a real clear strategy on how this can best be addressed. So bringing more people to the table who have innovations and ideas about all of that, both how broadband infrastructure gets built out and made available, but also how access to the internet and the technology that you need to access benefits, remote learning, telehealth. All those are critical services. All of those being able to be delivered remotely is going to be with us. And so we really need to invest not just the resources, but develop the strategies and the policies to effectively close that digital divide that exists.
Well, I guess, working from home or the home as a place of employment is not just the new normal, but will be the permanent normal for tens of millions of Americans. So maybe that's even more of a reason to treat housing as infrastructure. But we're going to have to end it there. And I just want to thank our 4 expert guests and members of the Housing Advisory Council. I want to thank Chairman Cleaver, Ranking Member Stivers, Pam and Henry, and everyone who joined us for this webinar. We hope you found it informative and maybe a bit inspiring as well. And please be on the lookout for future BPC Housing Advisory Council events under the direction of our project leader, Andy Winkler, who's working behind the scenes today. We are developing a very robust agenda for the coming months. So thanks again, guests, Eileen, Lisa, Ismail, and Seth. Thank you, and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.